oil prices are heading sub $20 per barrel, and analysts forecast the prices could go as low as $10 per barrel. While the future looks bleak with these figures, the way we respond will go a long way in cushioning the effects on our oil-driven economy. Joining us now to answer questions on the implications of this for us as a country, and in terms of talking about reform imperatives that we can use to our advantage at this time, is energy expert Madaki Ameh. Thank you so much for joining us. If we were to jump straight into this, it's no secret that Nigeria is heavily dependent on its reserves for gaining its foreign currency, but in light of the current issues that we have with coronavirus, that driving down demand and that having a knock-on effect on demand, and therefore the price is dropping, how bad do you see things getting? How do you think Nigeria will survive under this type of climate?
Well, thank you very much. For so many years, we have been depending on the sale of crude oil, to earn a huge chunk of the national income. And it's a very precarious situation because we are unable to determine the prices of the product because of the fact that, the interplay of demand and supply globally determines whether the business we are doing is profitable or not. And I don't think that any country should allow their fortunes to be that determined by forces that are outside of their control. So we're learning a good lesson right now because for a very long time, our budgeting cycle has been dependent on a very simplistic formula of how many barrels of crude oil can we produce this year, how much is it likely to sell in the international market, what they call the oil price benchmark, and then they just set it completely oblivious of what the market might determine. And because we are not really a very influential member of the global oil market in terms of being able to determine the prices because of the volume of our production vis-a-vis, the other heavy producers, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia, like Iran, so it's a bit precarious because even when we set our oil price benchmark, it's not based on anything that is auditable and sustainable. Now we are faced with a situation where there is a COVID-19, which was not on the radar screen of anybody, when all the budgeting process was being done. And when we set our oil price benchmark for 2020 at $57 a barrel, it was, of course, overly optimistic, but it was actually not based on any indices, apart from maybe trying to take a trend and saying, well, the way it's going, it cannot go lower than this. But here we are in a $20 oil scenario, and with projection that it's going to go down to $10 and could even go down as low as $5. So in this kind of situation, what you must do is to re-strategize and ask yourself, some very hard questions about whether what you have been doing all this while makes sense or not. I have always been a huge advocate of the fact that, we are frittering our national resource, in oil away by just selling it for cheap. Why are we selling crude oil when crude oil on its own is not useful? Nobody puts crude oil in a car or puts it through any machine. You have to refine it. So whoever buys your crude oil at any price, even if the market price goes up to $100 a barrel, is buying it to pass it through a refinery, make it usable, and then in that process, make money for themselves too. So as far as the value chain for oil production is concerned, the only people who get to make real good money out of oil is those who refine it and sell refined products. So from an oil-producing company's point of view, from an oil-producing country's point of view, we have no business crying that the price of crude oil has gone down in the international market. In fact, I think it actually favors us, and it gives us a rare opportunity to re-strategize our industry, take another look at whether we have been doing the right things these past 50 years, of doing what every other person does, And then we can change our strategy and make our oil and gas industry a lot more profitable than it is right now.
Well, I know that you said...
I can assure you that if the government has the
I know that, sorry to interrupt you, sir. I know that you said that Nigeria could use the low oil price to its advantage. Could you extend a bit more on that point? Because I know that there are other countries in the world who don't export as much oil, and yet still they're able to navigate the space in a better way. So how do you think Nigeria can turn $10 per barrel, for example, to its own advantage?
Yeah, it's simple, and the thinking around it is not rocket science. It's fairly simplistic. Oil, like I was explaining earlier, the crude oil is not useful. It's only useful when it's refined. And then you get all the many byproducts that you can get from it. PMS, AGO, DPK, Jet A1, all the lubricants, more than 20 to 30 different hardcore products that you can get from crude oil when it's refined. So I think, what the crude oil sellers do is that, they're looking for quick money. They think that the process of refining is too cumbersome and it will waste their time. So so the refineries buy from them and then refine and sell the refined products at several times, the price of the crude. So, so purely from an oil producing point of view, if you manage your oil industry professionally and from an economic perspective, you have no business selling crude oil, because the dollars you want to earn from selling crude oil for cheap, you will earn several times, at least 10 times the amount of dollars you will earn selling the refined product. So why wouldn't you simply delay your income a bit, and then put your crude oil through a refinery and then sell it at several times the value of the crude? So what we could have done consciously by taking an economic decision to do this is what the market has forced us now to do. Because you produce the crude, you put it on vessels, nobody is buying your crude, and the price is falling down. You cannot control the price. You cannot find a market that is better. So I think, honestly, that low oil prices favor Nigeria and Nigerians more than high oil prices. And it has been demonstrated recently. When the prices fell to the current levels, the government brought down the price, the pump price of petrol, of PMS, from 145 naira, where it has been for years, to 125 naira, and then further down to 123 naira 50 kobo, effective 1st of April. I think we are still doing it wrong, because it's not about price fixing and price reduction based on what the crude oil price is going for at any particular point in time, because that is still a regulated market. I think what the government should now do is to take advantage of, the current instability in the market, the low prices, and completely deregulate the downstream sector. For instance, just to give you an idea, we say that 50 kobo a liter, we are no longer paying subsidy, because the price of crude oil has come down to a level where we can accommodate that kind of price for PMS. What happens to AGO? What happens to kerosene, DPK? What happens to aviation fuel? The refining process is exactly the same. And the cost of PMS on refining is much higher than the cost of AGO, DPK, and Jet A1 on refining. If you are buying per metric, to the petrol, 200. The simplistic answer is that it is only PMS that the government is involved with, but that DPK and AGO have been deregulated, and Jet A1, which is also a variant of kerosene, of DPK, have been deregulated. And so private investors bring it in at any price, they bring it in, and sell at any price, they bring it in. I think that's very unfair to the Nigerian population, because there's no reason why petrol should be selling at 123 naira 50 kobo without subsidy, and diesel and kerosene are selling at so many times at almost double that price. Because at the end of the day, diesel and kerosene are more effective in terms of economic growth and usage by the people than petrol, because it is only people, well, affluent people, who own many cars that will benefit from cheap petrol. How about running the generators when the power, power is not available?
Well, Mr. Madaki, it is time for a short break. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We are still joined by energy expert Madaki Ameh, and we're discussing how Nigeria can use the drop in crude oil prices to its advantage. Mr. Madaki, if we look at countries like Indonesia and Singapore, to buttress the point that you were making prior to us going on the break, they took the decision, or at least Indonesia, took the decision to exit OPEC, even though they produce over 3 million barrels of crude oil a day, and now they are one of the largest exporters of refined oil products, both Indonesia and Singapore. How can we model our structure like theirs, or but at least to our own Nigerian capacity, in order to gain the same results?
Yeah, sure. It's not rocket science. If you are in the same business and your neighbor or your competitor who is in the same business is doing better than you and applying better tactics, I think that you should just copy blindly and copy shamelessly, and I think that's what we should have done all this while. Yes, just like you said, Indonesia was a member of OPEC for a very long time, just like Nigeria. But at the point, they just felt that instead of selling their crude oil for cheap, they would rather buy crude oil cheaply from countries like Nigeria, add value to it through refining, and sell it back to them at several times the value. And today, Indonesia is a net exporter of refined products, and they just left OPEC, some 10 years ago, and the economy is better off for it. Then the Singapore example that you gave, Singapore doesn't produce a single barrel of crude oil, but Singapore is a major refining hub. They have more than 50 refineries in Singapore alone, and almost half of the country work, in one refinery or the other. And at the end of the day, it creates a lot of value. They buy refined crude oil from countries like Nigeria, like Saudi Arabia, other people who just want quick money, and they sell their crude. And then they refine it, and then they sell back to countries like Nigeria who have the resource but cannot refine. I don't know why we cannot refine. All our refineries are either being turned around or about to be turned around, for as long as I've been an adult. I don't know how you can just keep turning around refineries forever when the process is so simplistic, it's so easy to carry out, that even people who didn't have any form of formal education or didn't read chemical engineering in the Niger Delta, are refining, crude oil in local refineries, and then creating the environmental hazards that come with those sort of
Right. Continue your point, sir.
So basically, what I think that should happen is that, we should focus on refining. We should even go a bit further. Already we, apart from the fact that we have our major refineries, our 4 refineries in Warri, the 2 in Port Harcourt and the 1 in Kaduna, are hardly ever functional, and perpetually operate, below their installed capacity. For as long as any of us can remember. We should focus on modular refining. We should focus also on mainstreaming the illegal refiners in the Niger Delta and giving them a career. They are already into this business of refining to survive, because they must pay their children's school fees, they must feed, they must do, they must live their lives, and they operate in an environment where there is a lot of affluence from the same resource and they cannot reach it. And that's what drives them into criminality. I think that if the government comes up with a policy where their skills are harnessed, they are set up into cooperative societies, modern means of refining are introduced to them, and then modular refineries are bought and they are given to their cooperatives, and crude oil is given to them at very reasonable prices, say like $5 a barrel. They will be happy to carry out this business and then, provide refined products everywhere, and it will be all over the place. That's one way of ensuring that we increase our local refining capacity while we try to get a handle on why our refineries are never working. Well, I find it strange that anytime a Minister of Petroleum Resources is appointed, one of the things he promises to do, or when somebody comes on board as Group Managing Director of NNPC, one of the first promises he makes is that he will make sure that the refineries start working. But what I also noticed, I don't know whether others noticed it with me, is that the target date they always set for the refineries to begin to work is when their tenure is expected to end. For instance, they will say, well, we expect the refineries to be working in 2023. And 2023 is when the tenure is supposed to expire. So what you are saying basically is, don't hold me accountable for the non-functionality of the refineries until I finish my tenure and I'm about to go. So how do we, what are the key performance indicators? What do we judge your effectiveness by? If you are giving us a terminal date that will terminate by the time that your tenure is supposed to expire, when we can no longer hold you accountable and we cannot do anything to you. It happened with the last Minister of State for Petroleum, where I heard the same thing when the current Minister of State for Petroleum came on board. I heard the similar thing when the current Group Managing Director of NNPC came on board. But let me then quickly also make another point. We do not have to refine locally for this model to work, because we can't wait for our refineries to be turned around, before we start earning income. I think it's even more efficient in our current circumstances to refine abroad, because we're already buying refined products abroad. So what I would recommend that we do is to export our crude, to contract foreign refineries, maybe 2 or 3 of them, that will just be dedicated to carrying out the refining activity for us as a contract. We pay them for the process of refining, and then they bring back to us 100% of the byproducts from the refining process. If we do that, quite frankly, we will engineer this economy in a way that will surprise everybody, and we'll earn more than 10 times what we ever contemplated that we could earn from selling of crude oil, for cheap, which at the end of the day translates to a national budget at its best of about $24 billion. How does a country of 200 million people, so endowed with natural resources of every kind, budget $24 billion, which is just a joke, compared to, what it should be? America has a population of about 100 million people, more than Nigeria. But in this current COVID-19 situation, the stimulus that they put into the economy is $2 trillion. If you do the maths and you multiply by the exchange rate, you will be, people will go crazy. So at the end of the day, how come such economies are able to do this, and then we cannot? And every year we keep limping, we keep hoping that, the price of crude oil in the international market will go up by $1 or $2, and then we call something, an excess crude account. Excess being that the selling price in the market is higher than the benchmark we set for the budget. It's the laziest way to do a national budget, quite frankly. And I think that we cannot continue this way. I thank God, in fact, we have been foisted with a situation which we are not even able to control. Cargoes of our crude oil are floating on the high seas and do not know where to bet. So we are virtually begging people to buy the crude. And I think that at some point, we must begin to look at crude oil in the same way as we look at crude water that is sold by Merua on the roads. Because there's actually no difference. It's a pipe in the ground bringing out some fluid. You get the point. One is darker than the other. One is water, the other is crude oil.
So, Mr. Madaki, you used a word earlier, you used the word hope, and that's something that I'd like to focus on, because it has happened currently. What we're looking at is the forecast to $10 per barrel, but at the current station that we're at, crude prices have increased, and that has brought a little bit of hope for the Nigerian economy. Not only that, people are now feeling, Nigerian citizens are feeling that perhaps Nigeria will be able to meet its financial obligations, not only to its citizens, but also globally, the global commitments that it has made on the world stage because of this rise in crude oil prices, even though the forecast is now $10 per barrel in the future. But I want to ask you what sort of promises or what sort of support we can give our policymakers at this time in order to engineer such a scenario as the one you speak of.
What I think we should do is to take a conscious decision that we are no longer going to hinge our hopes on what happens in the international oil market. We are we're a major oil and gas producing country, for God's sake. So why should we sit down here in Abuja, and then have production fields in the Niger Delta and have absolutely no control of how much we can earn from this resource when we actually can. The point I made earlier is that low oil prices is actually more beneficial to Nigerians than high oil prices. Because if you say that the price is beginning to go up, what that also means is that the pump price of petrol will also go up. So would Nigerians rather pay a higher price for petrol? And then when it goes up to a point, the government will now say that they have started paying subsidy because they don't want the amount that we pay for petrol to go higher than a certain threshold. Mm-hmm. And for quite many years, we have been going through this very wasteful and inefficient, process of frittering in the region of 2 trillion to 2.5 trillion naira from our national budget, paying subsidy for petrol, which is the most wasteful kind of subsidy anybody can ever imagine. So we have nothing to celebrate with any rise in the prices of crude oil, because it's going to translate directly to an increase in the pump price of petrol, because crude oil prices constitute 75% to 80% of the cost of a liter at the pump. So at the end of the day, there's nothing to celebrate. Nigerians should actually, be looking at scenarios that give the prices at about $5 or even $2, so that when you refine, you can price the end product the way you like, and it will still be profitable. As it is right now, even at $123, 123.50 kobo per liter, which is the current price for PMS, the government makes nothing. If you look at the template from PPPRA, there is not a dime in that template that says this is profit to government. How can you run a business without making profit? And then you expect to be able to pay your bills. So I'm still wondering about the kind of voodoo economics that we are practicing, and how that is going to translate to national development. Because as long as it keeps
national development
like
is exactly what we are interested in hearing more about. Mr. Ameh, please do stay with us. We will be coming back to you for more thoughts on Nigeria and the energy sector as a whole after this very short break. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We are still joined by energy expert Madaki Ameh. Thank you for staying with us, sir. I wanted to switch the conversation a little to talk about the effects of COVID-19 on the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. It's no secret that the Nigerian Department for Petroleum Resources has instructed oil and gas firms to practice social distancing, in effect telling staff and employees to stay home. What type of effects, apart from the natural, obvious causes, do you think will arise from directives like that?
Well, the whole world is shut down right now, so even if we are producing, we don't have anywhere to sell it to. But I think that we should still sustain, production, especially because most of the platforms are actually automated, So and all the production takes place in the fields, and the number of staff, the number of physical human beings required to keep producing, is not that much, So I think maintenance staff, the production staff should actually still continue to work. That's what I think, And of course, the impact of COVID-19 on the industry is already being felt. The demand has crashed. The price has crashed. But I think that rather than bite our fingers and lament, and discuss on how we can cut our budget, the thinking caps that our leaders need to put on their heads right now is, how do we take advantage of this current situation to finally deregulate the downstream sector of the industry and make it more profitable? One point that also needs to be made, and this is a safety issue, is that if there is such a wide disparity between the cost of petrol and the cost of diesel and kerosene, the temptation will be there for those who want to maximize profit to adulterate diesel and kerosene with petrol. Because if they mix it, they're going to get a higher quantity, and they're going to be able to make more money selling them at prices that are almost double the price of PMS. The disadvantage of that is that because PMS is the most flammable product in that chain, you may end up having a situation where diesel will begin to set houses ablaze. Kerosene will begin to set people ablaze when they try to cook with it. You get the point? So what PPPRA, which is the regulator of the downstream sector, needs to do quickly is to forget about this idea that diesel and kerosene are deregulated and that those who import it can sell them at any price. First of all, that is throwing the Nigerian public to the dogs and saying that people can do price gouging and mess up the citizenry, and that the people are at their mercy. If you are regulating an industry, and that's the entire downstream sector, and you call yourself the Petroleum Products Pricing and Regulatory Agency, you cannot just be regulating only the price of petrol. Otherwise, you are not doing anything useful. They need to take control of the entire downstream sector and be interested in the manner in which the prices of all the products in the downstream sector, petrol, diesel, kerosene, jet fuel, all the lubricants, the things that people use, will come, how the prices will come out, to the end consumer. But currently, they're just lazily looking only at the pricing of PMS and allowing the importers of diesel and kerosene to sell it to Nigerians at any price they want. They are creating a risk for the citizenry, because very soon you start seeing people's houses going ablaze when they try to cook with kerosene. Because if I own a petrol station, and people buy kerosene from me at 215 naira, and they buy petrol from me at 123 naira 50 kobo, the temptation to put some petrol into the kerosene to make the volume higher so that you can sell it at a higher price is actually real. And if they are not looking at it from that perspective and getting DPR and PPRA, to work together to ensure that they get a better handle on how the other products in the chain are priced, then we are actually exposing Nigerians to a risk that we are going to start seeing the impact of very soon. And it will not be good for us. You can't combine that kind of risk of people's houses going ablaze from cooking with kerosene, or people's generators, packing up from the fact that there is petrol in their generator. We can't combine that kind of calamity with the current shutdown and the calamity, associated with COVID-19. Right. So I think that, we have to have a more present environment where, governance is hands-on and result-oriented, where those who are heading agencies of government that are critical to our national development and our growth are actually given targets against which they are measured. As it is right now, I think that it's a day-to-day, sort of rambling on, and then at the end of the year, they say, well, the year has ended, let's start a new budgeting cycle. We are in unusual times, and unusual times require unusual activity and action. Those who are able to take that extraordinary step, of thinking outside the box and solving problems, creating value where none appears to exist, that should be, at the helm of affairs and taking this country in the direction that we desire to go. And honestly, as it is right now, we don't have a choice. The country will continue to remain broke as long as the oil market is down the way it is and nobody is buying our crude, and we cannot think of how to convert that same crude to a more profitable business. And it's so easy. When you refine and you have so much of refined products, we have neighboring countries that have no oil. There is Benin Republic, there is Togo, there is, all of the countries in West Africa, in Central Africa. Most of the countries in Africa do not have any form of, petroleum resources. We can set up, because there's this lame argument that if the cost of products is too low in Nigeria, they will smuggle it across the borders to neighboring countries. Right. The simple panacea for that is that we open a new business vista for our downstream companies who will go to all those neighboring countries, set up modern petrol stations there, then we truck the products to them legitimately. When the products are available at the pump in those countries, they will not need to smuggle. And then whatever money we earn from there will be foreign exchange, which comes back into our economy here and helps to expand the size of the economy. I think our economy, national budget revolving around $24 billion, $25 billion is an insult. And we have continuously sustained that insult for so many years without thinking outside the box and imagining how we can actually expand this to a $1 trillion, $2 trillion a year economy, which is actually possible because if we are all looking at oil, which is easy to produce because it's just like getting water out of your borehole, and then we refuse to do other things like diversify into agriculture, into solid minerals, into human services, into information technology, into all the other areas where we can earn several times more money than this oil that has become an albatross, then we are not doing anything. You can't be behaving like your ancestors and expecting to compete with countries that are thinking of the next generation and artificial intelligence and so on. And that is where I think our challenge is. We need to change from the analog mode of governance to the digital mode of governance. As it is right now, we are still running the analog, and we are going to be left far behind unless people put on their thinking caps and try to put square pegs in square holes so that things can move in this country. There are so many talented people in this country who can get a lot of things moving for this country at the same time. But there's too much bad politics around. So at the end of the day, it's not so much what you have to offer, but who and who decides to to say, okay, fine. Government appointments and positions honestly should not be seen as a largesse. It should be seen as a call to do something different. And how come we are never ever able to do this? Start from governance, at the federal level, through the ministerial level, at the level of the presidency, through the ministerial level, through the governors, in all the states. If we have innovative people who, then of course through the local government chairman at the last rung of governance. If we have people who have fire in their eyes, a determination to get things done in the right direction, and bringing in new form of thinking into governance, so that we can run government like a business, and run it profitably, like a business, then we will get to the next level. Government has so much to offer because of the sort of resources at their disposal. Just look at now, government, just by a pronouncement by the president, nobody is going to work, and the whole place is shut down and everybody is just, staying in their houses. Before now, politicians and other people will be pretending to be busy. Okay, let them be busy now. This is the time for them to be busy doing something. Is anybody able to be busy? We are all shut down, and the world the skies have not collapsed.
Mr. Madaki, I want to shift gears ever so slightly before we run out of time. I want us to discuss the Petroleum Equalization Fund. This has been an implicit part of the petroleum price subsidy since 1975 in Nigeria. But my question to you is it working, and is it worth keeping, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question. Most Nigerians are not even aware that there is such a big organization called the Petroleum Equalization Fund. And what the Petroleum Equalization Fund does basically is to try to ensure that the price of petroleum products is the same across the entire country. So just to give you an example, a petrol station that is in front of Mosimi, which is a big depot, close to the port in Lagos, should not ordinarily be selling petrol at the same price with a petrol station in Sokoto or in Maiduguri or in Port Harcourt. Oh, no, okay, Port Harcourt not a good example because you can also, there's proximity to a refinery. But the point is that, in 1975, when the Gowon regime set up the Petroleum Equalization Fund, the idea was to ensure that all across the country you get to pay the same price for petrol, because what should result in the differential, which is the cost of transportation, is taken off the marketer through a process called bridging. So they pay for the bridging costs, which is the differential in the cost of transportation through trucking to the far-flung petrol stations, in faraway places from where the petrol or diesel or kerosene is lifted from. So Petroleum Equalization Fund is actually a subsidy organization and has been, so it's been there, for quite some time.
Mr. Ameh, we have about 20 seconds left until we go to the break. So in one word, is it worth keeping? Okay. I think they should be merged with the Petroleum Products Pricing and Regulatory Agency. Because the work they do is fine, but it's all part of pricing of petroleum products. Indeed. So why do you need to have a whole government agency deciding, existing just to decide to pay money to transporters of Mr. Madaki Ameh, energy expert, thank you so much for coming on the morning show this morning to share your thoughts.